All right. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our first panel being the talk with our lovely VRChat staff about going beyond the binary, hosted by the wonderful moderator, Just Jamie, and with featured guests, Momo the Monster, Pi, and Strasz. Go ahead and enjoy. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful talk. Whenever you're ready, Jamie.
Thank you, Cassie. Welcome, everyone. My name is Just Jamie, they, them. I am head of media here at Trans Academy, and I am once again honored to be hosting and moderating this talk with VRChat staff for the third year in a row. This year, we're doing a slightly different format. As you can see by the title of our panel, it is Beyond the Binary VRChat Staff Talk Identity. And if you look at the graphic here, you'll probably notice something about all of us, and that is the fact that all of us here on stage today are non-binary. And we're going to talk today about what that means to us and how we experience the world, both in VR chat and just our general day-to-day lives. I put out a form last week, and we had some lovely members of our community submit to us questions. And so I'll be working those questions into the conversation, but it won't be like a standard question and answer type thing. I want it to, I want it to be more of a conversation. Yes, I want it to be more of a conversation. So at any point, also our panelists, feel free to jump off of each other, segue into other topics, things that are related. Yeah, be free with it, basically, no pressure. And I hope you all enjoy. So to start us off, I would like each of you to please introduce yourselves with your name, pronouns, title, and then please give a brief explanation of your job descriptions, because we can all see them here, but many of us in the audience and even myself don't necessarily know exactly what your jobs are. So Strasz, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm Strasz, they, them pronouns. I am a senior community manager at VRChat. A community manager is a lot of things. I am the person people scream at. That is, I think, the most common way that I can describe my job to people. But realistically, I am the person. Community managers all have different responsibilities. If Flair was here, I could bounce some things off of them. But generally, my responsibilities specifically are on the communication side of things. And so figuring out how to communicate things to the VR chat community, as well as communicating directly with the community and bringing that feedback back to the team, and kind of translating it so it's understandable and actionable for people that don't necessarily interact with the community as much.
Awesome, thank you. Pi?
Hello, my name is Pi. I should say my pronouns, they, them. I'm not super used to that. I don't really mind. You can call me anything. I'm the release team lead at VRChat, which means some parts management. That is, I do the open betas, which some of you might be familiar with from the Discord or from actually running them. We have one ongoing right now. But it also means I do engineering. I find it quite funny, like despite the name of this panel being Beyond the Binary, I am actually also a client engineer and I do write code. And that often means sort of getting projects over the finish line. So I fix a lot of bugs as they come up, just short of something shipping to everyone on what we call a live release. And yeah, I guess as part of that, I work very closely with a lot of different teams, including Strasz from the comms team and Momo for when a release touches something that creators use or the SDK or anything of that sort. So I'm very well networked within the company. That is part of what I do.
Very nice, thank you. And Momo?
Yeah, I'm Momo the Monster. You can just call me Momo. I use he and they pronouns, although any are really fine for me. And my title is engineer. I've done a lot of things at VRChat, but always on the creators team. So the team I'm on, we build the tools, we build the SDK, and we've been working most recently on items, which we finally get to we've been able to share a tiny little bit with you with the reference cube coming out just on Thursday. We got that out. I also do some product management for items specifically. I helped with that, and at VRChat, that means that I'm working on like the strategy and the roadmap and the defining what's actually going to be. What does it mean to have items in VRChat? How do we integrate this idea into the existing platform and all the worlds and avatars without breaking everything, so that it's something fun that everybody can enjoy and that can help VRChat survive as a platform. So mix of all kinds of stuff, but always very creator focused since I joined VRChat 5 years ago.
Nice. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. All right. So to open this conversation, what better place to start than the beginning, whatever the beginning means for you all. Some trans and non-binary people describe having a sort of aha moment as far as realizing their gender identity. But with the lack of resources on being outside the binary, this can be a more complicated process for us. Do you feel you experienced a aha moment, or was it more of a gradual realization or shift? Whoever would like to start.
Yeah, I'll go a little bit. I was quickly trying to think of what my aha moment might have been. And it's kind of funny, but I think the first time I even heard like the concept of somebody being non-binary, I won't be able to remember the movie, but Benedict Cumberbatch played some like non-binary fashion icon or something. If it rings a bell with somebody, please speak up. So I think that was probably just within the last 5 years. And seeing that, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. It makes a lot of sense with what I know about gender. I'm AMAB and have identified as a man for all of my life until about 2 years ago. I always just kind of thought I was like a more feminine man. Just like in the way that I carry myself, in the company I seem to keep, and who feels comfortable around me, who I feel comfortable around. I remember seeing that, and it was just the first time I'd even like really seen the concept, kind of made concrete. And I think that got in and cracked my egg a little bit. I think since then, and making more friends that are non-binary, both VRChat staff and outside, started just like looking over my whole life and it making more and more sense to me, with probably the biggest flip coming about 2.5 years ago, when I saw a skirt on a mannequin at a department store, and it literally stopped me in my tracks because I just saw myself in it. I was like, I think that'll look really good on me. It was the first time I'd ever really thought something like that. And I didn't do anything about it. And then I went back to that department store like 2 days later because I just couldn't get it out of my mind. And I bought it. And it was the first of many where I just kind of like let myself, or once I had the idea in mind that like I can do this, and I think this represents a part of me that's always been here, and I just never had words for it. Like, I thought it was, people thought I was gay growing up. I didn't think I was. I wouldn't learn things about that for much longer either. But just like none of it ever really made sense to me until I learned more about the identity, just the very concept of being non-binary, and it really just kind of blew my mind. And I've been learning a ton about myself and gender the last couple of years.
Oh, that's beautiful. I'm glad you got that skirt. I want to say I could definitely relate to just like even hearing about the concept of being non-binary in the first place. I didn't have my experience with even trans people outside of daytime slop television until I was in college. So to meet actual trans people for the first time, you know, and trying to get used to that idea that this is like a thing, a real thing, something that people experience, and then to be kind of not told, but maybe just slipped it like, oh, you know, you've been talking about the way you experience gender, or perhaps don't experience gender, perhaps you're non-binary, and oftentimes with something new, the initial reaction is like, no, like people are afraid of new things, and it's like no. But over time it's just like you learn more about yourself and how and your feelings, and yeah, definitely can relate to that similarly.
Hmm. I think I I I know I'm not too much younger than Momo, but I can relate a lot with like certain aspects of it. And Jamie, with I think yourself too. I think when I was in like I had no concept of uh the concept of trans or the concept of non-binary or genderqueer or anything until I was like in grad school. I had like I first started learning about these things when I was in college proper, but I really didn't have any like I knew they existed, but I didn't really connect with them at all or think
Mm-hmm.
much about them or read into it at all until I got to grad school and kind of came into it from more of a theory perspective where I would be, reading a lot through, I went for, in my master's is in English, but it's kind of a joke. It's more of a master's in continental philosophy. So you read a lot of theory, and I would read a lot of like queer theory. I'd read a lot of theorists from like the 80s and 90s and 2000s that were kind of talking about gender as a construct. And I was in it from a very theoretical point of view. Like I was into this as like, okay, I can take this and I can deconstruct text and blah, 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 blah. And, but like, it was very all like on this very theoretical level. Um, and I think it was basically like that for a long time for me, where I wasn't really considering it for myself until probably I want to say also I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago when a little bit before I actually came into VRChat, I started considering about all the stuff that I had been reading and writing about and considering it as applied to me and what it meant for me. And it recontextualized a lot of stuff for me. It's really difficult for me to describe what non-binary means for me, even
Mm-hmm.
to this day. And one of those reasons why is like, and this is one of those things that I think a lot of us feel, and we don't necessarily speak it out loud quite a bit because we don't want to, take away necessarily from people that don't feel this way. But like, you kind of hear, I can hear the way like Momo and Pi will talk where it's like, we don't, I don't really care what you call me. People in my personal life know my pronouns who are close to me. But like, I don't make it, like, I don't correct people when I don't necessarily dress a certain way to make people think that I am non-binary. And that's not like I'm hiding sort of thing so much as it's non-binary for me is this like conceptualization of myself and how
Mm.
I see myself and kind of how I manifest that. And sometimes it has external it affects how I externally represent myself in the world and how I want people to see me. But fundamentally, like because I came to it in this very like intellectualized kind of way, it's like a very personal thing for me where it's kind of how if I close my eyes, how I see myself, and how I conceptualize like this concept of me and my body, which is like a weird thing to try and like explain to people because it's like not like I don't have that like one sentence like yeah this is what it means for me. It's like okay here like sit down and like give me an hour and I can explain this concept to you.
Yes.
Um, which is why that like when I will be like to people I'm like non-binary but like it's probably a lot deeper than that. It takes a lot more unpacking but um
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't it's more for me. It's more my conceptualization of myself and my cumulative narrative as a person. Which is like once again, even that feels like very academic and not like meat, but it is what it is.
No, I get what you're saying, and I kind of feel that as well from a personal standpoint. But non-binary as a category is so broad and encompasses so many even like subcategories of identity, I guess you could call them. It's funny that you mentioned the oh, I don't really care what you call me, because why I wouldn't say I'm the like exact opposite from that. It's
Hmm.
it's that saying like gender is a performance, right? And what is it like to perform non-binary? We are given these messages, which are true. They're true messages. You do not need to be a certain body type or be born a certain way to be non-binary. Anyone can be non-binary, and they can. I know for me in my everyday life, I feel like I have this need to be seen or like perceived as androgynous as in some way. And while it was definitely not the sole reason I started like my medical transition, it was a reason for me. And everyone has their own reasons for doing so. I will say something that kind of added to that desire to do that, that personal desire for me to do that, was actually how how I am perceived in VR chat, because so many people come into VR chat um and explore their identity, learn their identity within VR chat, which is an amazing thing. I was one of those people who came into VR chat and I already knew who I was. I already knew my identity. I already knew I was non-binary. But VR chat is the first place in my life that I ever experienced actually having that validated. And so I was like, okay, if I can do this online, is there a way I can make this like just by the appearance of my avatars and things like that? Is there a way that I can do this for myself for real? And I decided to like pursue that. And that's not what everyone is going to do, and that's totally okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the androgyny and sort of divide between how you want to dress thing is definitely something that relates. You mentioned at like the beginning of the question, right? Is it a slow, gradual thing or an aha moment? It's definitely the gradual thing, and I think I'm still very much in that. I'm still very much learning about myself in that sense, and it's been interesting from a perspective that I think is a little bit different actually to the things mentioned here, in that I knew about like the concept of being trans and trans people for quite a while and quite a lot of my life, I think, compared to many others. But it was never something that appealed to me specifically from the perspective of, while I had moments where I didn't feel like a man, gender that I was sort of born with, right? Um, I also never felt like a woman. So I would like look at trans people, like in my life that was mostly trans femme people, and I would kind of be like, well, that's like really cool. You get to express yourself in the way that you want to be. Wouldn't it be nice, right? Wouldn't it be nice if I could do that? Except if I do that to completion and I see myself as a woman, that doesn't work either. In the same way that it doesn't work that I see myself as just a man to some degree. And so that is sort of that part where learning about non-binary being a thing and learning about the whole, okay, actually I can just make my gender whatever I want. I can make something up, and that's real now. If I say that it is for myself, that's neat. But it also still comes with the trouble, and this is, I guess, part of the journey that I'm figuring out, is I do like the androgyny and I do like the dressing more feminine, especially in real life. I mean, even here in VR, like I have, you know, I have a booth girl avatar here, right? And like, how does that fit together? How does that fit with, I don't actually want to be a woman in that sense. I don't see myself as trans femme, but at the same time, I do like having that sort of body shape, that sort of dressing. I like being seen as that to some degree, right? It's an interesting divide for me that I'm working through figuring out at the moment.
Kind of a bit like a balancing act. And I know we've pretty much all kind of touched on how our identities relate to us personally. But of course, we live in a society, right? And whether that's in within the real world or VR chat. And so I've been curious about, how do you deal with moments of maybe not feeling queer enough for the queer community, or not binary enough for the binary world? Or do you grapple with that at all?
I think we're all super lucky at VRChat that it sort of just isn't a problem
Yeah.
at work. I am super happy with that, and it's actually funny. I need to like tell this story. I need to fit it in somewhere, so it has to be now. When I talked to like Tizzy about appearing on this panel and it was announced, I actually had a coworker like reach out to me and was like, "What? You're non-binary? I didn't even know." And the thing is that it doesn't matter. It's fine because people still respect whatever I put in my Slack profile, and I am Pi. I've always been Pi, which is surprise, not my given name, right? Ever since I joined the company, I've never had like a coming out. I've never had a I'm non-binary. How does that work for everyone? It's just we're just so open that it kind of doesn't matter, and I really love that. And it does mean, however, that it's sort of, at least from my side, I can't talk much about the struggle of being queer at work because there is no struggle. I can be that, and that is very awesome. That is very amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I definitely I agree with Pi. It was nice not having that. I did have so like I wasn't necessarily out as non-binary at my previous job, but hilariously my previous job was completely the opposite, where even like cisgender women, I worked at a marketing company, and one of my cisgender coworkers, she had dyed her hair, and she had dyed her hair like purple or something, and we work in like
Nice color.
marketing, advertising. It's very like this isn't uncommon. There's very creative
Right.
people. There's, you know, this is how like artists feed themselves typically as you go into marketing. And my boss like pulled her aside and was like, you can't do that. Like even that level of expression, even for someone like that, wasn't allowed. And I like we were yelled at once because, you know, none of us were trans, none of us were non, I should say, like I was, but I wasn't at the time. So, you know, we started putting pronouns in our like work signatures anyway, and my boss was like, well, like I don't have a problem with that, but what if a client has a problem with it? So like, you know, you ran into all that kind of stuff, which luckily you never even have to. Like I don't even have to think about that at VRChat. I and I'm really grateful for that. In my personal life, luckily also, like I haven't really had to think about that very much. I think I am lucky also in that I'm a in this strange place aesthetically where I'm a 5'6", fairly thin person, and so and I'm bald, and like I, you know, I if I put on a pair of like khakis and like a button up, I'm gonna blend in with like just like think of if you close your eyes and are like, you know, 30-year-old dude, I will blend into that. On the same sort of token though, because of my body shape, if I put feminine clothes on and throw a wig on, I will blend in with that too. And so I've kind of been very lucky in that I can just be whatever I want that day and not really run into too many issues. And this was kind of an issue like Pi, and I ran into this too. There was a point in my life where I thought like, you know, do I want to transition? Would it be easier for me? But then I kind of thought about it, and it's like I don't want to, like, yeah, there's days where like I wake up and I'm like god damn it, I hate having a beard. But then there's like a week will go by and it's like I look really good, you know? So it's like I kind of you flip-flop, and I think one of the things of um becoming comfortable with yourself is you kind of have to get comfortable with that. Like androgyny, it presenting in an androgynous way can mean being in like smack dab in the middle, or it can be a more gender fluid thing where you kind of waver back and forth. And sometimes that can be like it's difficult. I sometimes say this to people who are trans in my life who are like, you know, I obviously I exist here, right? Like I know a lot of trans people, and I'll say that to them, and they look at me with horror, right? Like that is the peak of dysphoria, right? That's like the worst zone to be in. But I think for if you're non-binary and you kind of exist in that space, and like you make peace with that, and you kind of adopt a very it is what it is attitude, which, you know, I think one of the things is when I'm sure we'll get into this at some point, but I feel like a lot of non-binary people have the stereotype of like being extraordinarily chill, and I think that's just one of those reasons why. Is you kind of have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable to embrace this sort of thing.
Yes, no, I definitely agree with that. You get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I will also say that I am also lucky as far as being out at work. I was lucky, I guess, in my journey to begin with because I was living abroad. And I was living in Japan at the time. In Japan, when it comes to gender identity, is kind of in this weird middle ground that in some ways being non-binary is more acceptable than being like a binary trans person there. And so I came out there and it was there that I realized because like you, Pi, I'm like, I am not a woman, but I am not a man either. Do I have to give up the femininity in order to be non-binary? And living in Japan, I realized that the answer was no. No, I don't have to do that. But coming back, I knew I was coming back to a different environment. And me personally, I never planned to come out at work. It was an accident, mainly because one of my coworkers was trying to set me up with her kid. And I found out that the said kid was non-binary, and it just kind of came up in conversation of like, I don't know how you feel about that sort of thing. And I just, without really thinking, I just said, "Well, I am too." and um, and my supervisor was kind of like, "What?" And then I was like, "Oh, my train's coming, gotta go." And it didn't get brought up again until we were able to have like a one-on-one lunch a bit later, and she actually apologized to me, which I wasn't expecting. She had asked me why I didn't say that like in my job interview, and I was like, are you nuts? Like, why? I'm like, I don't know if I'm like, I'm so glad that you're chill and like the rest of the company is chill, but I don't think you realize what kind of world we live in. Like, I cannot just go to a job interview and say that. I was never planning on coming out to any of y'all. So she asked me how I wanted to handle it. And I told her that, I was like, now that you know my pronouns, if you could use them, that would be great. But you don't need to bring it up to everyone. And it was sort of over time because I also I work in marketing, and they very much notice the grammar and everything. And they're just like, something's different here. But they were all like super, super chill about it. So I definitely got very lucky in that regard. Yeah. Um, Straz, I know you said it might come up at some point. Sorry, before I move on, Momo, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't know that I have like a great story. I definitely, the same at VRChat. Obviously, it's a very easy place. If anything, it's surrounded by people who I know would accept me for however I identify, and so many people, finding things out about themselves and sharing that, makes it a very very welcoming place for it. I've I've definitely found, I've attended like queer events for a long time as an ally, and I'm kind of negotiating the space now of like attending as someone who's non-binary, and so far I've found them very accepting. I live, this is Googleable, so it's not new news. I live in Portland, Oregon. It's there's a very big queer community here, very strong. So there's lots of events, and I've been like very well accepted. Even like as you can see, I'm the only person who didn't get the memo about using your avatar for the picture, so you can see my real picture up there. I have a beard, and I love my beard. I try shaving it off like once every 2 years, and every time I'm like, God, no, like it doesn't work. The beard balances my face out really nicely. But I've also been finding, it makes my chin looks bigger than it is. I'm a small person as well, so any extra length I'll get. But so I'm it's very obvious when I'm out and about. If I'm wearing a dress, it's like I'm a bearded lady. I have a beard, but I'm presenting more femme, but like clearly not all the way. And I'm not trying to present myself that way. So it's been really wonderful to be accepted for that in the new communities or the new ways that I'm navigating my communities. I will say I definitely still feel a little shy about some events. I'll look at events on a calendar, and if they're definitely leaning into, they'll say, women, which is including trans women, and they'll often like put non-binary as well. But if it's like an event specifically for people like that, I won't usually attend. I haven't quite crossed that barrier yet. Because it feels, even though like I feel like that energy will be my energy and will match me well, I worry so much about taking up space from other people or being in spaces where someone thinks that I don't belong. I think that's one of the reasons that when I realized I was non-binary, when I learned enough about it to be like, oh yeah, clearly, like I know this makes sense for me. It still took me quite a while before I was willing to like say anything, to other than to like, my wife and some very close friends, because I didn't want to take up space from other people that, I feel like are more marginalized than me, or, or have a harder time. So yeah, there is a little bit of a chilling effect there that I think I'm working through.
No, I get that. If I see that same sort of rhetoric, like women and non-binary, I also don't show up for kind of like an equal but opposite reason, and that I am trans mask, and that just doesn't seem it doesn't seem like necessarily the space that I show up, and then it's kind of a chilling effect, like you said. The air changes, and so I don't even know if that's something people realize sometimes, just because of, I guess, the statistics, or like the numbers of how, like, just numbers wise, most people will be trans femme or like feminine leaning or something like that. So no, I definitely understand like kind of taking up that space. I do wish people were a bit more obvious about it, because sometimes it doesn't click with me, and I'll show up somewhere and I'm like, oh wait, they didn't actually want someone like me here. Okay, but yeah, no, I understand that. I was going to say, Straz, you brought up feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable, and Momo, you talked about it a bit as well. And that conversation kind of is now. It was asked, what does gender dysphoria look like to you if you experience it, or if you feel like you experience it?
Yeah. Go ahead, Momo.
Go ahead, Straz.
Straz and
Fine.
Momo.
So I think that my answer for this is pretty short. I feel pretty lucky in that, for the most part, I don't really. I would say 95% of the time, I don't really experience dysphoria. That 5% I can pinpoint exactly, and it's actually really similar to the previous conversation that we had. I think there's this. It's not in. I don't feel dysphoria in the sense of when I look in the mirror. I don't like, or don't. I don't feel any dissociation with that person that I see. Where I feel it is more in social places, or with conventions that I somehow don't fit into but fit into. I think one of the things that is really, and this is an interesting one to bring up, but it's something that I mean, it's a thing that I first, and I struggled to say this word, but like became famous for, with the video essay that I made. And if you don't know, I used to, maybe one day I will again make video essays, but the one that got the most attention was on gender. And one of my motivations for making that was this concept of people would see people wearing anime avatars, specifically like anime girl avatars in VRChat, and have this perception of the people that would be wearing them as like it was a sex thing, rather than like an identity thing. And like, no shade to anybody that like, trends in that direction, but my own experiences in VRChat at the time told me that like not everybody, but a large amount of people that were in these avatars are doing so for identity reasons. And that was something that I really wanted to highlight. And something that still kind of burns me and gets under my skin is when people choose to ignore that and choose to see anybody that's wearing a avatar as a sexualized thing. So like another thing about me, which you may or may not, I have my avatar tattooed on my arm. And I sometimes have gotten comments from people online about my avatar as being too sexualized, as, you know, just being basically porn, which is something that pisses me off to no end. Because if nothing else, do you think that I spent like $1,300 to get porn tattooed on my arm? And also, it doesn't really align with my real life experiences of when I've existed in space. The people that compliment me on my tattoo are traditionally cis women. This is it's always, I've noticed this is a universal trend. 100% of the tattoos, it's like 80% cis women and 20% men of color. That's like that's who will compliment like any of my anime tattoos, but specifically that one.
Interesting.
But there's this profound anxiety, and it often comes from usually cis men about that, where they'll, you know, be very policey about like, is this like, this is just porn, or it's like, no, this is identity to me. This is like what I am. And that does get me in this space of like, people will say that sort of thing, and I feel like that is when I feel like I have to defend myself, where I have to bring, okay, here, let me bring out like my academic self and explain to you what's actually going on here. And I think like that 5%, that's the closest thing that I experience in dysphoria, because it feels like it's an attack on my identity.
No, that's definitely understandable. Yeah. I would say for me, I don't ever necessarily consider myself having experienced dysphoria, but I definitely knew what euphoria was like. And that was having people see me as the identity as I see myself, whether that's within VRChat, whether that's within real life. I feel most successful when I've confused people, and that makes me very happy. And so yeah, it's not so much a dysphoria thing to me, even when it, like, and that's just on the social side, but even when it comes to the medical side, like I thought about it for years before I decided I wanted to pursue medical transition, because there are these specific things that I want out of it, right? And because I felt like sort of that imposter syndrome, like I felt like I really needed to make sure, you know, and I think that's something that a lot of non-binary people experience, whether they go through social transition, medical transition, or even don't tell anyone, is that sort of imposter syndrome of, am I queer enough to do this? And so I almost didn't feel with myself queer enough to pursue medical transition. I thought that was kind of something reserved for binary people. And so when I decided to do that, it was very liberating for me. And then watching the like changes in the mirror, and it was very euphoric. And so I don't necessarily say that I ever experienced dysphoria, but I definitely know what it feels like, that once I decided to be open and honest about it and be like, this is who I am, it's like a fog cleared, a fog that I didn't even realize was there.
But
Yeah,
that part feels very relatable. It's just what I want to say to that. I guess specifically the not dysphoria, but yes to euphoria part. I never had. I don't think I've ever really had dysphoria in that sense, but I always thought of myself as completely medium. I before I started going into this, I never had a moment when I sort of looked in the mirror and was like, wow, today I look pretty good. I was always like, yeah, I look like myself. This is who I am. This is fine, right? And it was only when I started exploring that space, instead of dressing androgynous, buying clothes that I actually want to feel comfortable in, that sort of thing, when I started, like, when I had some moments when I would look in the mirror in the morning and I would be like, okay, hey, this is something. I actually enjoy myself, like seeing myself like that, right? And that's like the part that made me think, okay, maybe what if I move away from just saying I am a man and accepting that I don't super enjoy what I see, but I also don't hate it. What if I try to go a direction where I can actually enjoy that and I can feel like myself much more than that? And very much sort of on the same path of like, is this enough that I sort of get to do a medical transition, right? Is this enough for myself that I actually would want to do that, or not, right? And that is a very sort of loaded question, and the question I am still asking myself, and I am still coming to a conclusion of as sort of time goes on. But I very, very much relate to basically everything that you just said. I think that is also part of why it's super important to have that kind of representation, because hearing you say that, like, that to me is like, oh yeah, I am definitely not alone in that, right? Like many people experience that sort of thing. I mean, that's not the first time, to be clear, right? Like there are people that I've had this sort of conversation with, but it is something that I find usually, compared to more binary trans topics, is something you really have to discover from talking to people, from being in communities, and it is not something that is super publicized in a way of like representation in media and so on. Or like, you know, you can be, you can even do a medical transition and still say I'm non-binary, and that is totally valid. That is totally a thing that is actually possible to do.
That's why spaces, not to just glaze Trans Academy, but that's why spaces like this are nice, because before TA, I hadn't actually met non-binary people who were like medically transitioning, so it wasn't even something that was necessarily possible in my mind. So yeah, hearing stories from other people is important.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely identify with the euphoria. I think identifying the euphoria I had felt helped me see the dysphoria I had previously felt, which I think mostly came up when I was in very male spaces. And this tie back a little bit to our theme. Definitely has happened in tech conferences and things. Most of the tech conferences I've gone to have been have really tried at least to have a nice balance and diversity of people. So it's not just, a bunch of men, but have, wound up in some spaces that feel that way. I'd say even more so I was in live music and entertainment for a couple of years, touring with bands and DJs. And I mean, that space is incredibly toxic and masculine. And being in a group of people who I have to be because they're on my crew or they're on the crew for the day, and having to work with that while they just continuously say misogynistic things and try to include me in that. And this is long before, I realized I was non-binary, but I knew I do not want you to think, to even think that I want to hear that, or that I would jump in and say these terrible things with you. And realizing how uncomfortable I felt in very male places made me realize oh, right, when I feel the most comfortable is usually when I'm around, when I'm in a group full of women, and it doesn't seem weird, no one's calling it out. And I definitely have some of my female and non-binary and trans friends to thank for seeing that in me and calling it out. I think about my an ex-girlfriend who had really seen herself as lesbian, thought she wouldn't be dating men anymore. And then was really surprised when she was attracted to me first off, and we started a relationship. Oh, I didn't think I really liked guys. To thinking about meeting another friend who's non-binary, and pretty soon upon meeting me is I don't know what's going on. I don't usually like guys, but I'm really comfortable with you. So can we hang out more? Hearing that more, and then just contrasting that with how terrible I felt in this place versus how good I feel here. I'm oh, right. I think I'm not this. And I clearly never wanted, I was never comfortable in that space. And I other people are seeing something in me that I always saw and thought I was supposed to keep hidden away. And they actually when I express myself that way. And it felt amazing to be seen in that way.
Oh, that's so nice. Oh, thank you. I want to touch on something that you brought up, talking about basically sort of being in very like male dominated spaces. Can anyone else speak to, because I know that's something that gets talked about in the tech field a lot. There's sort of like two differing sides. Like tech is very queer, but at the same time, some people consider it kind of like a boys' club in a way. So, is there anyone who'd like to speak on that and kind of how that feels and how they navigate that?
I think my experience is that it's oftentimes seen as a bit more, specifically the engineering side of tech is more seen as queer to some degree, and then
Mm.
you have like the tech bro scene, I'm going to call it, right? Like the sort of idea guy scene, that, like, Silicon Valley type thing. That's what I would at least sort of conflate with that. But it is probably, like, as in every field, there is probably some truth in that. There is some misogyny and some like anti-queer stuff in every field that you can go to.
That's fair, yeah.
I think engineering, or specifically, I guess I can only speak really to like software engineering. I don't have any experience in any other of the engineering fields that are out there. I feel like it's at least more possible to find your people there, partially because it's a very online space, so it is a lot easier usually to like find a remote job, for example, which tends to be easier in that regard. You don't have to present yourself sort of physically in an office like that. Um, but perhaps also from just sort of the people in there. I don't know.
No, that makes
But
sense. I did say tech, but that's like such a broad category. Like
yeah.
you'll find different things depending on where you go. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. Oh, Strasz, is there anything you want to say before I move on to the next topic, or?
No, I don't think so. VRChat's really
Okay.
my only experience in the tech field, so like, I'm kind of lucked out in that way.
Fair enough. No, that's definitely lucky for sure, for sure. Okay, so as we wind down a bit here, these next questions are gonna center a little bit more on VR chat. Just some things that people have been wondering about the space. I don't know, like please comment if they apply to you. If they don't apply to you, I'm not sure how much you'll be able to answer, but I ask that you do the best that you can for the benefit of our audience. So someone said that they are non-binary, but also disabled slash neurodivergent, and they were wondering if you have any other disabled or neurodivergent people on the team, and what is it like? As an extension of that, someone else asked about the ability to speak. Of course, VRChat itself has a huge culture of people who don't speak, of people who are deaf, people who are mute. So if there are any experience on the actual team with people.
I think I can answer a little bit of this question. So first uh to the question about neurodivergence, I would answer that in a kind of snarky way of take a guess. Yeah, I would I would say that there's probably a couple of us, um, and leave it at that. As far as disability, I don't particularly want to out anybody
That
as
yes.
because being disabled in the workplace is always a bit of a juggling act, even at the best of companies, because it's not just about your current company; it's about any future companies and all kinds of stuff in there. But what I say to myself, and this is often a different kind of disability, but I have Crohn's disease, which often comes with can come with some challenges. I'm lucky to be in remission for a pretty long time. So it's not something that comes
Good.
up, but it's always in the back of my head that
Mhm.
at any moment in time, there could come a time when I have to take an enormous amount of time off. And you have no idea when that's coming. It's literally, and mind you, this isn't too different. This is how you kind of deal with it internally. But it's not that different for most other people. You never know, like a car can run you over or something, but like, uh, generally like that it can be scary from a workplace position, and I've watched other coworkers go through things and be supported at VRChat. And so it kind of gives me some peace of mind that if that were to able happen, I would have people that would have my back. And to speak on a more micro scale, I feel very lucky for the team that I'm on. Once again, Flair isn't here today, but Flair and Tupper, we've both spent time where there's been one of us that's not been able to be there for some period of time, and the other people have been able to pick up, and that's always a really good way. And often, support for coworkers with disabilities or people with disabilities in general, it is a very, it comes from the company itself, but a lot of it's cultural. A lot of it's being willing to stand up for your disabled coworkers and also stand in for them and basically helping them, get to 100%. And sometimes that means you're going to have to take a little bit more on, and that's okay. That's kind of what it means to really have their back in that way.
No, that makes a lot of sense. No, I even though I'm not in the tech sphere myself, I guess legally, like when you're applying for a job and they ask about disabilities and things, they put mental health issues under that category as well. And much like my gender identity, I don't usually write that down. But I do have depression. I do have general anxiety disorder, and I've been very lucky with my job currently, in that the people I work with, and being a small company, working for a small company can kind of help with this as well. But just that when I felt safe enough to be open about that, I could be open about that and have that understood. And so, there are some days that maybe I'm a little slower than usual, or I've had to take like a mental health day before and things like that. So it's definitely one of those things where it's like you have to decide your look at your work environment, decide how safe you are, decide and figure out what it is that you can do for yourself, what the company can do for you, and if it's going to be a place that can accommodate. It's unfortunately very much not a one size fits all thing.
Yeah, I'll say generally, I've seen just a lot of accommodation of people with all types of issues, long-standing or sometimes just day of whether they're recognized as disabilities or not. I think being a fully remote company helps a lot. It really lowers the bar as far as the typical like physical world limitations that might make it really difficult for some people to to work for a company. Those aren't there, so it's mostly about communication and availability. And even there, people wake up and just like can't work that day for whatever reason. And we didn't have advance notice or anything else, but I've always found that team member, the manager will stick up for them. Other team members will come in to help, and we understand things happen. I think we've all had to like take sudden time for something and step in for or have a team member step in for us. So yeah, that's been really lovely to see. And I guess I was thinking whenever I think about this topic, I'm a little bit hard of hearing. I wear hearing aids IRL, and I've found the work that we do around like earmuffs and being able to focus audio, as someone who struggles to like pick voices out of a crowd. I also just have like auditory processing issues and some speech issues. That is so helpful for me, and it makes me wish that I had something like that in real life. My hearing aids are the closest that I get, and they get better. Every year there's new tech that comes out that's better. But I think in VRChat we've made a place that's much more accessible to people who are deaf and hard of hearing than many places in real life in that way.
I do have to say the earmuff mode is amazing. Like that was always as someone who is anxious, it's always been like very good. And even the Steam audio beta, like the technologies that are available in VR, oh, I wish they existed IRL. It would be so
Mhm.
nice to just ear them up sometimes. Pi, it sounded like you had started speaking as well. Was there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would sort of say to that, like how open are we to supporting that, is a little anecdote. Like sometimes our community says the wildest things, and one of the things that I sometimes read is like, what if VRChat ever does something like anti-LGBT, right? Like, what if we ever do something, we bring out an update and it removes all the trans flags or something? And like, and every time I see this, I have this thought of like, do you know how many people would quit on the spot if we ever shipped something like that? Like, that's just not going to happen. And I think the same is like that sort of feeds into that disability thing. Like, we're all. I find if you're open to that thing, to queer people, to LGBT people, then being open to supporting people with disabilities is sort of a very natural extension of
The
that. It's not always true, of
intersectionality,
course,
yeah.
but there's a yeah. I think there's a good chance if you support one, you support the other.
Oh, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, we're down to the final few minutes, and I want to end things on a kind of lighthearted note. So, for a couple of specific people, I have some questions. Pi, did future Pi come up with a funny question to ask themselves yet?
No, you can move on to the next one.
Okay, well, this one is still to is still to you. Someone asked, "Is pi infinite?"
No, because the space on the nameplate ends, so I couldn't put it there.
Ah, that's unfortunate. Sorry about that. And to you, Strasz, it was asked, how do you feel about being the face of VRChat's patch notes videos? Did you expect that it would become part of your job?
No. This is actually so like I've read people saying a bunch of different things about it. Where when I was hired at VRChat, because I had made video essays before, and then just happened to fall into that, people assume that that's what I was hired for, but it was not what I was hired for. I was just on the community team, and I don't remember if Tupper was on vacation or what happened, but Tupper had started the developer updates and then uh stopped them for a while because he was just too busy. And I said, "Oh, okay." I forget what the feature was that was coming out. But I said, we think we should do a video for this." And so Tupper's like, "That's a good idea. I don't have time. You do it." And so I was like, "Okay." So I did it, and then that became a thing that I would always do. And then Tupper started the patch note videos and went on vacation or something, and we had a patch come out, and then I did them. And when I did it, Tupper came back and was like, "That's a lot of work, and also I think you know, handled that better than I did. That's your job now." And I said, "Oh, cool, thanks." um,
It's so funny to me
so
too because I remember that Tupper did start them, but you went on vacation recently and Tupper came back and there was like metaphorical rioting in the streets. Everyone was like, "Where's Strasz?"
well, it's really funny because in that video you can there's two parts to that. There's like the part that was displayed and the behind the scenes part. The behind the scenes part I saw from the back, and it was when I came back from vacation, and my friends that are also friends with Tupper were telling me that like Tupper was like walking around like, you know, I gotta go record the patch notes. Damn it, where's Straz? Like kind of thing. And then in the video itself, you could see like Tupper's just like kind of irritated in the video. It's really funny. And I think, you know, Tupper very much likes doing those things, but I think one of the things that I'm very thankful for is that um from a higher up level, VRChat gives us a lot of freedom, creative freedom in making those. And that allows, you know, us to kind of express ourselves and to kind of present as characters in a certain way, which is actually really useful because people can really connect with that a lot easier, and it makes people a lot more excited to read these things. Like how many communities get really excited about like, oh, there's new patch notes out kind of thing. And that
Mm-hmm.
helps give them some character and get people excited. And you know, the most difficult thing is getting people to read. And so if you can get people to do that a little bit more, then you're doing something right.
Very nice. Well, we are grateful to have you as our Patch Notes VTuber. Thank you. And I also, we're pretty much out of time, so I want to thank everyone who joined me for the conversation today. And thank you so much for being very candid with your responses. Like, I've learned about a lot about you all as people and how you see your identity, and I hope that it was enlightening for our audience as well. I hope you all enjoyed, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of Trans Pride VR.
Yay!
Yeah, don't make me do it. Thank you.